Let's begin exiting the A.S.A.P lane with Alan.
Hello, everyone. This is Alan Steelman, and boy, do we have a special one today. In fact, our guest said she was almost intimidated by having her name mentioned in the same sentence with the Dalai Lama, but indeed, here we are. So today's is entitled The Dalai Lama and Stefanie Tovar, and I think you will see the very close and real connection as we move through this. You know, in the midst of life in the digital age, the age in which we find ourselves, there is this global epidemic of stress and anxiety. And the Dalai Lama has said if we could teach every 8-year-old to meditate, we could heal the planet of violence in one generation. And as standardized testing has become more the norm, performance anxiety and stress have spiked dramatically among both teachers and students. My guest today, as I mentioned, is Stefanie Tovar. Stefanie is founder of Hanuman Homies, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to taking the healing effects of mindfulness, the umbrella term for yoga and meditation, to children in underserved communities. When you hear Stefanie's personal story, you will understand why this has become her very special mission. She is another in a long line of those whose lives have either been dramatically changed or saved by taking up a practice of mindfulness. Stefanie is Mexican-American, born in San Antonio, Texas, and in her own word, and I'll quote her directly, with many secrets. Among the secrets, as she says, I was doing my own cooking and cleaning by the age of 7. I was encouraged at home to withhold the truth of my culture by not speaking Spanish in order to speak, quote, clean English at school. She describes being traumatized, having to protect her mother from her father with a machete the night they left to move into a trailer park, where she experienced 3 sexual assault traumas before she turned age 13. You know, as background, there are an increasing number of school systems across the country who are incorporating mindfulness into their curriculum. Newark, New Jersey, being one example, has incorporated a daily 20-minute practice for students in kindergarten through the 4th grade. And to quote one 3rd grader, when I do yoga, I feel really good. I feel like my whole body is new, like I was just born today. Baltimore, inner city, being another example, kids living in one-parent households often bring high levels of stress and anxiety to school, resulting in classroom disciplinary problems and high suspension rates. The results from 3 years of classroom mindfulness practice has resulted in significant reductions in suspensions and other forms of discipline necessary to maintain control of the classroom and not to distract from the students' learning. So as you can see from Stefanie's own story, her own story resonates, I'm sure, with her and connects to many of these that I just outlined from both Baltimore and Newark. So Stefanie, welcome. It's really great to have you here. And I'm wondering if you, just as a starter, would mind sharing with some of our listeners some of the tangible benefits for children in a practice of mindfulness.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. I can speak from direct experience. There was a school, Hoffman Lane Elementary, in 2011, where I was offering yoga to the entire kindergarten class at the very beginning of the day. And it was very neat to witness how the kiddos that tended to be a bit more high-strung were calmer after that class, to be able to start their day more level-headed and a bit more at ease. The focus was a lot stronger. And the kiddos that were a bit sluggish in the beginning were able to have that energetic connection from the yoga practice to help them truly start their day fresh. So the whole community of the kids were united in the practicing of the yoga together, and they also were able to start their school day united from an even playing ground of sorts. Currently, I'm offering yoga in another school to kiddos from the grades kindergarten through 4th grade. And there was actually a really neat moment that happened recently where they came off of recess. And there were a bunch of crying kiddos right after recess. We had the class right afterwards. And we ended up, instead of going about practice as usual, we gave ourselves the opportunity to sit in a circle and to talk about what had just happened. And so it really gave a sense of community in a way that was very unique. from what might have undergone otherwise. Like kids were able to speak their truth and mindfully speak about it, not calling each other out, but to really speak from their heart. So we had a gorgeous opportunity to really develop that community and connectedness within the 2nd through 4th grade class when that happened. Anxiety before test taking has certainly been a great benefit for the kiddos. We give them breathing exercises and also movements to help them offset any of those stressors from poring over the papers or even just the anxiety of it. And we've also been helping them right now as we're entering into holiday seasons, how to help with the tummy aches and the emotional anxiety that can happen from being away from school and in the family life.
Well, one thing you might, just as a suggestion, share with them. I know they all, I would think, at least by this age, will know about the Wizard of Oz.
Yes.
And you might want to tell them that this breathing they're doing is their very own yellow brick road.
That's right.
On their way to their own Emerald City, a calm mind, where their troubles do drop like lemon drops. But anyway, I think they would enjoy that story. Mm-hmm. So your efforts are focused on children in underserved communities. Are there, I know I referenced in talking about the 2 examples from Newark and Baltimore about kids coming from one-parent households and some of the particular problems that come with that. Could you elaborate a little bit on some of the unique problems that come, and in your own story? You know it firsthand as well as from the kids you're dealing with now. Mm-hmm. Some of the unique problems that come with how you grew up and how some of these are growing up that you are teaching today.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, if anything, it's unique qualities that these kiddos have. And it does call for us as facilitators to be a lot more mindful in how we show up for our kids. There's one nonprofit that I serve through Hanuman Homies that works with kiddos in and out of foster care and CPS systems. And they are very sexualized kiddos. A lot of them have experienced sexual trauma or have witnessed very, I would say, advanced forms and expressions of sexualization. And so I have to be very aware about what I'm wearing when I come into the class with them. And I also need to be very deliberate about not touching kiddos, just because that could trigger off traumas of many forms. Also, in order to keep themselves safe, they've had to read adults and people very with a fine-toothed comb. So their BS meter's pretty high. So you cannot talk down to these kiddos. You have to relate to them as adults and be real with them. I mean, they really do appreciate that.
What is the age range you're referring to?
The kiddos that I serve at this nonprofit works with children aged toddler all the way to 16. And we actually are going to be expanding our programming to reach 16 to 24-year-olds there as well.
Oh. Okay, if you're willing, there's an old saying, what doesn't kill me makes me better, improves me.
Absolutely.
Reflecting on your own experience that I outlined in your own words in the introduction, could you elaborate a little bit more on the events from your childhood and how you became so resilient from that? I mean, what you went through is something that would have, quote, destroyed many, and probably has destroyed many, and yet there's no one more optimistic and upbeat than Stefanie. I wish this were not only audio, but were video, so my listeners could see you. They will see your picture, by the way, in the introduction, so they'll see you. But anyway, could you talk about how you developed so much resilience coming out of that experience?
Absolutely. So
it was traumatic, and yet you were resilient enough. You came through it out the other end, and you're now paying it back by what you're doing with kids that have, in many ways, your own upbringing, right?
Absolutely. It really has been such a great gift, in fact, my trauma and the experiences that I've had at a young age. And not being able to trust my own biological family, I ended up looking around me and seeing the family that was in nature and the family that was in spiritual family. And so I turned to nature, I turned to music to help uplift me. And then when I was in school, there were some beautiful teachers that really did help me feel held and heard in the classroom. And so that really did pave a way of great resilience and strength for me. And even turning back, I absolutely lean on that when I work with kiddos in underserved communities, because I can look at them and see that even though I'm looking at a 10-year-old, I'm looking at a 10-year-old that's operated like an adult for probably most of their life up to that point even. I may be looking at a 10-year-old, but I'm really dealing with a 24-year-old.
So they've got street smarts at 10 years old.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And I mean, I would, I wouldn't have had that gift to be able to relate with the youth in the way that I do had I not had my background. I wouldn't have been able to have found the beauty and the healing power of music and the healing power of yoga had it not had been for this dark path that led me to the rainbow, the end of the rainbow,
Right.
truly.
We'll talk about the music in a moment. You mentioned nature. Could you elaborate a bit on what you mean by that?
Yeah.
You mean going out for long walks in the forest, or what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I was blessed to be, there's this part, or we lived in this house in San Antonio that had this really big, deep backyard. And so when things were going on in the house, like screaming or whatever, I would go to the backyard and I would retreat pretty deep into the backyard. And I would lay in the grass and I'd sing with the birds and like do all these things. It was honestly, that was one of my best kept secrets, was music and harmonizing with nature and being with nature. It wasn't until I was probably about 6.5, that my music teacher discovered that I had a musical ability and that I was encouraged to start, sharing my music outside of my own little bubble.
Yeah. Well, this is a good segue. Our listeners need to know that not only are you doing great work now, but you also were on the road internationally as a professional.
I sure was.
Musician. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah. So I performed pre-professionally since I was about 6.5. Did some work in San Antonio and then also in Austin, and then finally went off to college at Emerson College. It was a graduating class of 7 of us, but 24 were recruited from around the nation. And then I got to travel internationally with Sesame Street Live.
Oh, wow.
And
how
Oscar the Grouch was my best friend.
So how old were you then when you were traveling with Sesame Street?
I was right out of college. So, yeah, I guess, I don't know, 19?
Yeah.
I forget how old I was. Somewhere around there. Yeah, it was pretty incredible, actually, to witness the world in that way and to travel and just experience my relationship to the world. And that was kind of cool, too, because being able to travel internationally, it helped me see the way people live and the way people rise and then also, fall. I was practicing yoga at the time, and so that was kind of a way for me to find a sense of groundedness no matter where my suitcases took me, because there's some places I was there for maybe 3 days. The longest time I was anywhere was for a month at a time. But aside from that, it was me and my suitcases and the work. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you were, that resonates with me because that's what I did for a long time. I would do yoga in my hotel room.
See, exactly.
Exactly. And so, there's and meditate as well. And there's a saying that, a metaphor I'm sure you've heard, that yoga and meditation don't change the external events in your life, but it does provide you with a surfboard to more calmly surf the stormy seas in your life.
Exactly.
And the few tsunamis that we all had.
Exactly.
And you had tsunamis very early in life.
Yeah. Well, and that is what I love to tell the kiddos as well, and acknowledge the fact that they cannot control what they were born into. They cannot control their life circumstances, but they can control how they handle it.
Exactly.
Right? And that has been everything for me with regards to yoga and meditation and helping me understand how I choose to relate with the world around me.
Right. So I've had guests on previous podcasts who, two that come to mind. One recently, Don Drake, who's a West Point graduate and was a very successful oil and gas executive and banking executive who had a career mental and emotional burnout, and he's now completely left that and gone to, he was working for the community church as a minister at one stage. He did the podcast on the yoga of Jesus, which was very interesting. That was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And then Dorsey Standish,
yes,
who also was a very fast-track engineer at Texas Instruments, who was on her way to everything that on the outside appeared to be what everyone would want.
Exactly.
And like so many, she hated her job, her career, and had a mental and physical meltdown. And she left that, and she's now the chief mindfulness officer at Mastermind. So I know you've talked about on the outside, you had a great career, something you had aspired to, but you also talked about you reaching a point of burnout, I believe. Is that correct?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And
Could you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, and I love how you said that because it's true. It's like Brene Brown says it beautifully, where she talks about mental breakdown / spiritual awakening are kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
Because I was on the road and I was having, I was on my way. I presented for like Matthew Broderick and like these big names at Madison Square Garden. But then there was this time where I felt this disconnect from the world around me, and while I was on the road, my first love committed suicide.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And this was...
Was this someone in the troop you were traveling with, or was it someone back home?
It was someone back home.
Oh,
yeah.
gosh.
And it was at in boarding school, which was a beautiful time. That I explicitly chose to go to school at boarding school in the Austin area to kind of reclaim as much of my childhood as I could. And he was there with me.
So you met him in high school?
I met him in high school.
And then you go on the road, and he stays back?
He ended up going to school for a little bit of time, and then he went to California, and then he committed suicide on his way from California back to Texas. He's hitchhiking back.
And was he clinically depressed? Or
He was, yeah. Yeah, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And so it was very hard. I mean, because at first I was already starting to feel numb to my way of being and feeling like I wasn't giving back enough. I wasn't contributing enough to society. I felt like even though my life was pretty cushy and nice and I was doing some work of benefit, but it was an hour and a half of a 24-hour day. When this happened with my first love, it kind of jarred me awake. And helped me acknowledge that we only have this one life and there's no room to waste time to really give back. And you never know when your last breath is. So why not seize the moment and give as much as you can today?
Yeah. Well, I talk about in the book that I wrote, Yoga on the Yellow Brick Road, about little did any of us realize that fantasy story for children, that's what we thought it was really the story of all of our lives.
Absolutely.
And, the Tin Man had to deal with heartbreak like we all do. It can either be failed relationships, it can be death of a loved one, as it was in your case. It can be brain fog, which we, in this stressed and anxious time, wake up every morning with. Many of us do. I do. And the need for courage at critical times in our life. And tragically, the temptation on the part of too many to use false wizards to cope with that.
Absolutely.
And as we remember from the story, the Wizard of Oz turned out to be a wrinkled little old man, and the moral was we have within us, all of us, what we need.
Absolutely.
And the false wizards, of course, lead to death and destruction. So anyway, thanks for sharing that. I know that was another trauma layered on top of the other traumas you had already. You experienced a lifetime of traumas before you were 18, really, didn't you?
Truly, yeah. I mean, the sad thing to note, too, is that wasn't our first experience with suicide. The boarding school was really at a place of a great epidemic because we were all trying to aspire to, like you said, like the false Yellow Brick Road and listening to these false Oz's when really, I mean, we had to find our own way. And we were also in a place of not much emotional support. So, yeah, it was a great challenge. I mean, it was the sixth suicide I've experienced personally.
Really?
Yes.
6, my goodness.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like you said, like I'm pretty positive and upbeat. The reason for my light is because of all the dark I've conquered. I mean, truly. Yeah.
Well, my only brother was bipolar and committed suicide. There was apparently a bipolar or manic depression, the other term for that condition, gene among the males on my father's side. And, by pure luck of the draw, I didn't draw the gene. My brother did. My dad did. My dad did not commit suicide, but three of my dad's 5 brothers, in other words, 5 males, all had bipolar or manic depression, and my only sibling, my brother, who was younger, committed suicide in his 30s. So
Wow.
it is needless to say, a heartbreaking, tragic thing for anyone to go through.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I know I've heard you mention the writings of Dr. Maya Angelou, who has influenced many, and
Yes.
you being one of them. Could you elaborate a little bit on her influence?
Absolutely. Well, when we left the abusive family, my mother and I, and we moved into the trailer park, that's where I experienced his 3 sexual assaults. And it was a very dark time in my life. It was at that time where I discovered her writing, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. And I quickly just swallowed up as much of her writings as possible. And as I continued to read, I continued to understand how she ended up being a person that survived, not only survived great trauma, but thrived and ended up not allowing all these things to be her, all these traumas to be her final story. She decided to transcend and to thrive regardless, So in me reading all of these things, I thought, oh, that's right. All these things that are happening to me, they don't define me. They're just a part of my story. I can choose to rise above, what has happened to me and choose to transcend my trauma. And so that, really, it catapulted me to another way of being at 13. And then as I was on the road, I came home to be with my family and to understand what that was like. Because I hadn't lived with my family since I was 13. And here I was coming home at about 24, 25 to understand what family is again.
Now, your family at this stage is your mother and any
Brothers.
sisters?
Mm-hmm.
So you were the only girl?
I'm the only girl,
Now,
yeah.
was there any contact with your father who was the one you had to defend your mother with a machete against? Or was he completely out of your life by then?
Unfortunately, he passed away when I turned 19 to larynx cancer from smoking. Really.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we had healing that was before even his diagnosis. It was such a gift to have that healing with my father. And my father did die gracefully. He used his time to really make amends and make peace with the people in his life that he had harmed as best as he could,
Yes.
So there's still traces of heartbreak there, But with me and my father, we healed as much as we possibly could.
Okay, so you came home at age 24 after being gone all this time, and then what?
And so at that point, my mother, I was severely depressed. I was still with great heartbreak over my first love that had committed suicide. And she knew that Dr. Maya Angelou was a great influence on my life. She was at UNT speaking at this big engagement. And she told me and asked me if I would love to come.
So UNT is the University of North Texas.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. That's right. Yes. And so I went to speak, and she ended up offering this beautiful offering. She started by singing this African-American spiritual. Okay, I'll sing it a little bit. It goes... when it looks like the sun ain't gonna shine anymore, God put a rainbow in the clouds. And so she spoke to that. Wow. And then she ended up speaking to the whole congregation there about how we need to prepare ourselves to be a rainbow in other people's clouds and to acknowledge all of the people that have helped usher our way to where we are right now. And so at that point, I was in such great darkness and such heartache, and I knew that I was called to be a light of sorts to the work that I was continuing to do in theater, but I knew it still wasn't my full light. I knew it wasn't my full capacity to show up and to show love for people. And so that's when I made the choice. I thought on her words, and I was really absorbing them in my heart. And literally, the next day I was meant to go off on the road again to do another show for kiddos. And I called them and I said, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to stay home and try to be a yoga teacher. Oh, it was the best. People thought I was going crazy. They staged an intervention. And I'm like, yeah, well, mental breakdown / spiritual awakening. Yeah.
So you had the suicide by your first love, mm-hmm. and this career on the road was becoming more mentally and physically than you really wanted to deal with any longer.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was really craving connection, sincere connection.
You know, I know that you know many people, just like I know many people who say mindfulness either changed my life or saved my life. And I know it's hard for some of our listeners who may not have been through this to say, how in the world could somebody doing what I see those women in those pictures doing, how could that change your life? That looks like another gym workout to me. Believe me, the magic is in the brain and what it does to your mind.
Absolutely.
You know, and as I've said on prior shows, if you can breathe, you can do this. It is not about doing those poses correctly. It's being able to breathe your way, and that is your own yellow brick road. That's your way to that place over the rainbow where that Emerald City is, where you can calm your mind.
Absolutely.
So, okay, well, so you've got a whole range of activities. I know we've talked primarily about your role at Hanuman Homies, which is focused on children in the underserved. Now, this recent grant you got from the Tegna Foundation, I believe, is that to focus on women who have been sexually trafficked and who are now trying to exit that life and get over the traumas they experienced doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes. I'm very grateful to the Tegna community for offering this grant, and also the WFAA community grant committee to even referring us that way.
WFAA being the television, the ABC station in Dallas. Yes.
So grateful for their support and for their their financial support of this, because we actually get to work with a new nonprofit that's called Poetic, and their whole slogan is "I am poetic." So it's all about helping them change their story, really. You know, like I said before, like we don't have to wear our traumas and let that be our life and dictate our life. We get to change our story time and time again. And so it's all about helping them rewrite their story. So we're going to be offering them weekly yoga, and hopefully being able to show up for them and help them learn how to reclaim empowerment with their own bodies and to help choose a different life.
Are these women who were kidnapped as teenagers somewhere in some other country and brought here, or are they both from other countries and from America?
It runs the gamut, truly. I mean, it some of them were lured through, I guess you could say persuasive conversation that led to, I'll help you get back at your parents, or I'll help you, whatever, or even people just trying to financially make do. I mean, some of these humans were also left on their own, parents deserting them, and then all of a sudden they have to make money, and they're at these crazy young ages having to figure out how to survive. And I mean, truly, they did a segment on this on NPR. I think it takes up to 48 hours for a person, if a child leaves home, for them to be approached by somebody.
48 hours.
48 hours. Within 48 hours, they've been approached by somebody with the desire to traffic them.
Yeah.
Especially, and Texas is pretty up there with regards to the recruitment of people in this way, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay, one final question before we close out. So, as you will appreciate, yoga, or mindfulness and yoga together, yoga and meditation under the umbrella term of mindfulness, according to Yoga Journal, which is the best source of data on this, says that there are approximately 40 million practitioners in a country of 320 million. And we're in the midst of this unprecedented epidemic of stress and anxiety that is killing people in record numbers. And yet that 40 million are largely white females who have enough disposable income to be able to afford to pay for yoga instruction.
Yes. So
all my efforts are focused on the same people you're focused on, the other 88%. Men who think it's not macho enough generally, seniors who think they're too old, stressed out kids and teens and college students, Latinos, and African Americans. Mm-hmm. So being Latina yourself,
yes,
I've heard that there's a language barrier a bit, since there are not Spanish words for some of these poses.
Yes,
so
it's such a challenge.
How do you deal with that?
I have
How
to.
do you say downward facing dog in Spanish?
Truth, yeah. Well, and I have to admit, like there's many other humans with other language barriers as well. I feel like there is room for all of us to grow with regards to inclusive languaging. I know some people are so against Sanskrit usage, but I almost feel like that could be helpful to the general population, just because one can understand in many different areas, like, okay, we all have one language we can go through, or actual mirroring and I guess you could say the modeling of the shapes to help offset that, because it's Spanish, it's like Mandarin, it's all these different languages that we're trying to overcome. But I will say, as a Latina, like, there is a lot of work that we still do need to do to be inclusive. And when we see race, we don't just see black and white, that we see the myriad of colors that is our world. Truly.
The true rainbow.
The true rainbow.
Exactly.
That's right.
All right. So on the true rainbow, I will close. Stefanie, thank you so much for being a guest today, and in particular for your willingness to share your very inspiring personal story. I want to once again quote the Dalai Lama. If we could teach every 8-year-old to meditate, we could heal the planet of violence in one generation. That's the work that Stefanie is doing and the work that is being done by others. And may we all take time each day to slow down and take time to breathe and just be here now. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next week.